He did not marry her for love. He married her because Tancredi ordered it, and no one in the Ferrante family had ever survived telling Tancredi no. The guests called her the ugly one, the silent girl with the scar, the nobody handed to a man who could have had anyone. For 21 days, Marzio agreed with them. He barely learned her name. Then, on a night when the snow fell like ash and the house smelled of cold iron, he opened a door he was never meant to open. What he saw behind it did not just change his mind about her, it set fire to everything he thought he wanted. The Ferrante estate sat above the harbor like something carved out of the winter itself, all black stone and tall glass. And from the study on the top floor, Marzio Ferrante could watch the freight lines crawl through the snow along the water. He liked the height. From up here, the city was a map, and a map was a thing you owned. Every warehouse along that frozen shoreline paid the family a tax it did not know how to stop paying. Every crane, every rail car, every customs officer with a second mortgage, they all belonged to him, and he had made sure they knew it, without once raising his voice. He was 34, and he had never wanted anything he could not eventually buy, take, or bury. The men who worked for him said he had frost in his blood. He took it as a compliment. Warmth was a leak. Warmth was how men like his father ended up in the ground, before their time. His father had been a warm man, they said. Beloved, generous to the wrong people. Marzio had watched them lower all that warmth into the frozen earth, and he had decided, standing there in a borrowed black coat, that he would never be beloved. He would only ever be obeyed. The Vasari answered, said Cesco from the doorway. Cesco was the only man Marzio trusted to stand behind him with a gun, mostly because Cesco had never once wanted the chair for himself. Old man Vasari will come to the table. He wants the marriage on paper before he opens the northern routes. Marzio did not turn from the window. And the daughter, Ambra. Cesco said the name carefully, the way you handle something expensive. They say she's cold. Good. Marzio finally looked around. Cold is honest. Cold. I can plan around. That was all. The marriage was a plan. Ambra Vasari was beautiful, the way a bank vault is beautiful, sealed, valuable, and without a single surprise inside. Her family held the rail spur north to the border, and Marzio held the water. Put the two together and no cargo moved through the province without a Ferrante hand closing around it. He did not need to love her, he needed her signature and her father's freight lines. Love was for men who could afford to lose. He had it all arranged. He always had everything arranged. That was the entire point of him, which was why the next knock at the study door bothered him more than it should have. It was not Cesco's knock, and it was not one of the guards. It was slower, older. Marzio knew who it was before the door even opened. The way, bad weather in an old wound. Nunzio, his uncle's man, stepped in with snow still melting on his shoulders. He was a gray, folded person who had spent 40 years carrying other men's messages and had learned to give nothing away in the carrying. He did not sit. He never sat in Marzio's house. Don Tancredi wants you, Nunzio said tonight. At the old house, the room seemed to drop a degree. I'm hosting the Vasari in 3 days. He knows. Nunzio's face did not move. He says, it can't wait 3 days. He says come alone and come hungry. He's had them lay 2 plates. 2 plates. Marzio turned that over. His uncle did not eat with people. Tancredi Ferrante took his meals alone, at the head of a table long enough for 20, and let the empty chairs do his talking for him. In the 11 years since Marzio's father died, and Tancredi had lifted him up and made him a king, the old man had summoned him 100 times, but never to a meal, and never with the word hungry, which in his uncle's mouth had always meant something other than food. Did he say? Why? Marzio asked. Nunzio was already turning to go. At the door he paused, and for the first time something flickered across that gray, careful face, something that, on a less disciplined man, might have looked like pity. He said it's about a promise your father made, Nunzio said, and that you're going to keep it. Then he was gone. The snow kept falling on the frozen freight lines, and for the first time in years, Marzio Ferrante felt the particular cold of a plan he had not made himself. The old house crouched at the end of a private road, half swallowed by pines, bent low under the snow. It had been Amedeo Ferrante's house once. Marzio's father's, and Tancredi had moved into it the same winter they buried him, the way a hand slides into a dead man's glove. Marzio had never gotten used to seeing his uncle in his father's ruins. He doubted he ever would. Two plates waited at the far end of the long table, set close together, an intimacy that felt like a threat. Tancredi was already seated, a small, dry man, with a full head of white hair and eyes, the flat brown of river stones. He did not rise. He gestured at the chair beside him with two fingers, and Marzio, who bent for no one, sat. "You've grown impatient with your success," Tancredi said, pouring wine with a steady hand. "I can hear it in how fast you drive up my road. Eat first. Business sours the stomach." Marzio did not touch the food. Nunzio said this was about my father. The old man's mouth thinned. He set the bottle down. "Everything is about your father. You are about your father. This house, that harbor you're so proud of." He let it settle. 20 years ago, before you were worth listening to, Amedeo made a promise to a man named Renzo Marchetti. Renzo kept this family breathing through the bad winter, the one the stories leave out, because I forbid it told. He asked for nothing while he lived, only once, in the worst of that winter, that if the cold ever came for him, the Ferrantes would take in what he left behind and keep it safe. Your father swore it on the name of this family. "A debt," Marzio said. "Name the number. I'll open an account tonight." "It isn't money." Tancredi looked at him with something close to enjoyment. "It's his daughter, Delfina, and you are going to marry her." For a moment Marzio was sure he had misheard. Then he laughed. "I marry Ambra Vasari on Saturday. The northern routes will still be there for some other man's son." Tancredi's voice did not rise, and that was how Marzio knew he meant it. The old man only went quiet when the floor was already gone from under you. "The Vasari alliance is finished. I've sent the word myself. You will marry the Marchetti girl inside the month, in front of every family that matters, and you will look glad while you do it." The rage came up clean and cold. "You're trading the largest expansion this family has ever touched for a dead man's charity case. Have you even looked at her? Do you?" A side door opened. She came in, carrying a tray. No one had asked her to carry, and stopped when she saw them. For one held breath. The three of them only looked at one another. She was small and plainly dressed, her dark hair pulled back without any care, and down the left side of her face ran a scar, old silvered, from cheekbone to jaw, that she made no attempt to hide and did not seem to feel. She kept her eyes lowered. She said nothing. She set the tray down, and her hands were perfectly steady, and somehow, that steadiness unsettled Marzio more than any beauty could have. "This is Delfina," Tancredi said, watching his nephew's face. "Say hello to your husband." She raised her eyes, then once, only to Marzio, and there was nothing in them he could put a name to. Not fear, not hope, not the desperate gratitude of a nobody being lifted above her station. Only a still, dark attention, as though she were reading a page no one else could see. Then she lowered her gaze again and left without a word. "She's a mouse," Marzio said, once the door had shut. "A scarred little mouse you want me to wear like a ring." "Marry the mouse," said Tancredi, picking up his fork at last, "and you keep all of it. Refuse her." He smiled, never reaching the river-stone eyes. "And you'll finally learn what your father's promise is really worth." Marzio drove home through the falling snow with no plan, and a single question turning over in the cold. Why would the most calculating man he had ever known set fire to a fortune just to bury a silent girl inside his house? They married her to him in the cathedral on the hill, because Tancredi wanted every family in the province to watch it happen, and no one to whisper that the Ferrantes had done a thing in the dark. Marzio stood at the altar in a suit that cost more than the priest earned in a year, and did exactly what his uncle had told him to do. He looked glad. He smiled at the right moments. He took her cold hand in his and slid on the ring, and when the veil came back, he made himself hold her scarred face in his eyes long enough that the front pews could see he was not ashamed. He was ashamed. He had simply learned, young, how to wear a face that lied for him. She said her vows in a voice so quiet the priest had to lean in. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at the candles, and once, only once, at Marzio, with that same flat, reading stillness, as though she were checking his work. Behind them the church murmured. He caught the words even through the organ. The ugly one. The charity bride. Poor Ferrante. Chained to a mouse when he could have had the Vasari girl. Somewhere in the back, Ambra Vasari's chair sat conspicuously empty. Her father had taken the insult and gone north, and the northern roots had gone with him. Marzio smiled through all of it, and promised himself that one day his uncle would pay for every whisper. He brought her home and gave her the east rooms, far from his own, and for 2 weeks he barely spoke to her at all. The first night under his roof, he found her at the tall window at the end of the hall, watching the snow bury the harbor, and he stopped only long enough to make the shape of things clear. "Understand me," he said. "This is my uncle's arrangement, not mine. You keep to the east wing. You will not embarrass this family in public, and you will not expect anything from me in private. Nod, if you follow." She did not nod. She turned from the glass and looked at him with that unbothered, weighing calm, as though he were a cold front that would pass through and be gone, and said only, "Good night, Marzio," and went into her rooms. It annoyed him for reasons he could not name, that she had used his first name, and that she had not once looked afraid. It should have been easy to ignore her. It was not. The house began to run better than it ever had. Meals he had not ordered appeared exactly when he was hungry. The staff, who had spent years flinching down his hallways, started to move like people who were no longer afraid. A leak in the accounts he had chased for months quietly sealed itself. When he asked the bookkeeper, the man said only that the signora had noticed something. She never took the credit. She never asked for anything. She moved through his house like weather, and left it warmer than she found it, and she said, perhaps 10 words a day. His men made their jokes when they thought the walls were thick enough. Sesko alone said nothing, but even Sesko, loyal as a hound, raised an eyebrow the morning he found the signora in the armory pantry counting the crates by hand, and asked Marzio later, carefully, whether the boss wanted the new wife kept clear of family business. Marzio waved it off. Let her count crates. Let her play house. A woman with a ruined face and a buried father was no threat to anyone. At night, she played chess. He found her the first time by accident, passing the library after midnight, a single lamp, and Delphina alone at the board, playing both sides against herself. White, then black, then white, again. Her scarred face lit gold, her hands unhurried. He watched from the dark hall for a full minute. She never rushed a move. She never took a piece just because she could. "A children's game," he said from the doorway, to see whether she would startle. She did not startle. "It's a patient game," she said, and moved a knight and did not look up. Most people lose because they need the win to come faster than it can. He told himself it meant nothing, a lonely woman and a board. But it needled him, the way she said patient, as if she were describing something she was already doing to someone in the room. The crack came 10 days into the marriage, at a dinner he had almost not let her attend. He was closing a deal with a man named Austri, who ran the rail yards the Vasari had stripped from him, and who had come to the table oily and smiling, offering Marzio a quiet way back onto the northern line. Marzio was inclined to take it. Austri poured well, laughed at the right things, and had his answers ready before the questions were finished. Delphina cleared the plates herself, which she did not have to do. As she lifted his, she leaned in to straighten his glass and said, very low, for no one but him. Don't sign with him. He has kept his coat on all through dinner because there is a phone in the left pocket. He has already used twice tonight. Under the table, he didn't drive here. Someone dropped him at your gate and waited in the car. A breath. The car had northern plates. Then she gathered the plates and was gone into the kitchen. And Austri was still smiling at the far end of the table, and Marcio sat with his wine going warm in his hand. He had told her nothing about Austri. He had told her nothing about the North. She served soup and folded napkins, and had not, as far as he knew, set foot outside the house since the wedding. How did she know that? He did not sleep that night, or the one after it. Austri left without a signature. Marzio invented a delay, and watched the man's smile go tight around the edges, and 3 days later Sesko confirmed the rest of it. A car with northern plates, registered to a company that owned nothing, that traced through 4 more companies that owned nothing to a single name in the cold country above the border, the Vane family. The Vanes, who had no reason on earth to be near a Ferrante rail deal, unless someone down here was quietly building them a door, someone inside, and a wife who served soup had seen it before he had. It was the 21st night of the marriage when the house itself woke him, not a sound, exactly, the loss of one. The old furnace ticked through the walls, on a rhythm he had stopped hearing years ago, and at some black hour past 2, it simply stopped, and the silence was what opened his eyes. He lay still. Beyond the glass, the snow came down like ash, thick and soundless, and under the cold, threaded through his own house, was a smell that did not belong there. Cold, iron, and beneath it, sharp and chemical, the flat gray reek of gun smoke. Marzio came out of the bed with the pistol already in his hand. He went down through his own house like a stranger in it, barefoot on the freezing stone, checking corners he had never once needed to check. The man who should have been at the front door was not at his post. That alone stopped his heart for a beat, until he found him folded into the coat closet, breathing, a wet knot rising behind his ear. Not dead. Someone had wanted him quiet, not gone. Someone had known exactly how much force that took. He should have shouted for the others. He didn't. Some cold instinct told him the others were the problem. That whoever had walked a killer past his gate had worn a friendly face to do it. So he climbed alone, one bare foot after another, the gun leading, his heart slow and enormous in his ears. The smell thickened as he neared the library. The door stood open a hand's width, lamplight leaking gold into the dark hall. He was never meant to see what waited on the other side of it. He knew that the way you know certain doors are meant to stay shut. He pushed it open anyway. The chessboard lay on its side on the rug, the pieces flung across the floor, and a white queen stood upright and alone in the middle of the room, as if it had chosen where to fall. A man lay beyond it, big, dressed in black, very still, and the dark spreading out from under him was not wine. A knife with a taped grip rested a foot from his open hand, not a burglar's tool, a working knife. The kind a man carried when he had been paid to do a particular thing to a particular person in the night. Delphina stood over him. She wore a plain gray nightdress and no shoes, her dark hair loose for once and falling past the scar, and in both steady hands she held a small pistol still leveled at the man on the floor in case the floor was lying. She was not shaking. Her breathing was even, and her face, when she turned it toward him, held exactly what it had held at the altar and over the chessboard and through every silent day between, that still, dark, reading attention, entirely without fear. For a long moment, the master of the house stood in his own doorway with the gun forgotten in his fist, and could not make a single sound. He had built an empire on knowing, in the first half-second, exactly what a room was, and exactly what it wanted from him. This room gave him nothing. Every rule he owned lay scattered across the rug with the chess pieces. The woman he had been ashamed to look at in church stood over a dead professional in her nightclothes, unhurried, and the house was silent, and the snow kept falling. And Marzio Ferrante, who was never surprised because surprise was how men ended up in the ground, was completely. He crossed the room slowly and crouched by the body, because he needed something to do with his hands. He turned the dead wrist over. There, half hidden in the crease of it, was a small tattoo. 3 short bars, like the rungs of a gate. He had seen that mark twice before in his life. Both times on men who worked the cold country. Both times on men the veins had sent. He came in through the coal door, Delphina said. Her quiet voice had not changed at all. They always assume no one remembers the coal door. She lowered the pistol at last, though she did not set it down, and tilted her head toward the body, almost gently. This is the 3rd one, Marzio. The first 2 never got as far as the house. The 3rd one, the words went through him like cold water poured down the spine. 3 men, 3 knives, brought on 3 nights for a particular person, in a particular house. And a wife the whole province pitied had been standing in the dark between those knives and him, saying nothing, letting every last one of them go on, calling her a mouse. He looked up at her from the floor, from beside the body of a man she had killed without raising her voice. And for the first time since Tancredi had set fire to his life, Marzio Ferrante had no plan at all, only a single, quiet, terrible certainty spreading through him like warmth into frozen ground. He had married her thinking she was nothing. He had been the only fool in the room. "Sit down," he said. It came out rougher than he meant it. "Sit down before you fall down." "I'm not going to fall down." But she sat on the edge of the leathered chair by the cold hearth, the pistol resting across her knee, and for the first time he saw that the calm was not the absence of feeling. It was a discipline laid over it, thin and hard as ice over a moving river. Underneath, the water was running fast. He straightened from the body. "Vain men don't come south for silver," he said quietly. "No. They come south when someone southern opens the road for them." She watched him arrive at it. "Whoever sent him knew your guards change at 2, knew the furnace would swallow the noise of the coal door, knew which room I would be sitting in." A pause. "That is not a robbery, Marzio. That is a map, and someone in this family drew it." The word family sat down in the cold room like a 4th person, and neither of them looked at it. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He wanted to name every man who had ever eaten at his table and vouch for each of them, with his life. But he had spent 11 years pretending not to notice the small wrongnesses in his own house, the deals that soured a beet too soon, the rivals who always seemed to already know his mind, and some locked room at the back of him had known for years that the rot was inside the walls. He had simply preferred the version of the story where it wasn't. "How do you know all of this?" It was not quite a question. His voice was climbing, and he could not stop it. "The plates on Austrey's car, the coal door, 3 men. You serve soup? You fold napkins? My uncle handed me a scarred girl out of a dead man's house and called her a debt." He took a step toward her. "Who are you?" For a long moment she only looked at him with that reading stillness. Then she did a thing she had not done once since the altar. She smiled, small and tired and terribly sad. "I am the debt," she said. He wasn't lying about that part. She turned the pistol over in her hands. "My father kept your family breathing through a bad winter. Your father swore to keep me safe forever. Both of them are in the ground now, and here I am." The last word carried an edge like the taped knife on the rug. "Do you know the safest place in the world to hide a dangerous person, Marzio? Under everyone's pity. No one ever thinks to search there." Something in his chest turned over and did not turn back. He thought of 21 days of calling her a mouse, of the laughter behind the organ, of himself at the altar, forcing his eyes to hold her ruined face long enough to look brave, while she read him move by move, patient, waiting for the piece to fall. "The scar," he said. He did not know why it was the thing he needed to ask. "Who gave you the not tonight?" She rose, steadier than she had any right to be, and crossed to him. "And carefully. The way you approach an animal that bites. She reached up and took the forgotten pistol from his slack hand and set it on the mantel beside her own. Her fingers were cold, up close, beneath the iron and the smoke. He caught it again, orange blossom, faint, the one soft thing about her. And he saw that the back of her left hand was split and swelling. The man had landed one blow before the end. Marzio took it before he had decided to, turning it toward the lamplight, pressing his thumb below the cut to read its depth the way he had read 100 wounds on his own men. She went still. Not the practiced stillness, this time a real one, caught and startled, as though no one had held her hand in years, and she had forgotten what it was for. Under his fingers he felt the single tremor she had kept out of her voice all night. Neither of them said a word about it. After a moment she drew the hand gently back. "The snow stops within the hour," she said, as if it had not happened. "The moment it stops, this man leaves tracks, and tracks lead to questions you are not ready to answer. Wake, Cesco. Only Cesco, no one who stood on the gate tonight." He caught her wrist as she turned to go. Not hard, she allowed it. "You've been protecting me," he said, "since the wedding. In my own house, from my own." He could not make himself finish it. "Longer than the wedding," Delphina said. The library went utterly still. The snow ticked against the black glass. "What does that mean?" he said. She looked at him for a long time, and he watched her weigh something heavy, and set it down again, and save it for a colder night than this one. "It means there is a great deal you were never told about the night your father died," she said softly. "And the man who told you the story you believe is the same man who put me in your house." She drew her wrist gently out of his hand. "Get the body out before the snow stops, Marzio. Then come find me, and bring the board." Something almost like tenderness crossed the still face. "It's time somebody taught you the game your uncle has been playing your whole life." Cesco took the body out, through the coal door, while the snow was still falling, and asked no questions. Because Cesco had learned long ago that the questions Marzio did not invite were the ones that got men killed. By the time the sky over the harbor had gone, the color of a healing bruise, the library was clean. The rug was gone, and only the smell of cold iron lingered, faint, like a word someone had said and taken back. Marzio found her in the small east sitting room she had made her own. The chess set was already out. She had righted every piece. The white queen stood at the center of the board, while the rest were only beginning to gather, as though the game had been waiting on him. "Sit," Delphina said. "White moves first. You'll want to be white for this." He sat. He did not touch a piece. "My father." She was quiet a moment, her scarred face turned toward the gray window. Then she began, and her voice was unlike anything he had heard from her, not the flat servant's murmur, not the cool warning at the table, just a woman setting down a thing she had carried alone for a very long time. 11 years ago, there was a night they told you was a rival hit," she said. "Men came over the north wall of this family and put your father in the ground, and you were told it was the old Durso feud, and the feud was answered, and everyone agreed the books were balanced." She moved upon one square patient. "None of it is true. There was no rival. The wall was never climbed. The gate was opened from the inside with a key, for men who had already been paid in the promise that when it was done, your father's harbor would be split with the family from the cold country. The veins." Marzio's hands had gone very still on his knees. "My father was Renzo Marchetti," she went on. "Your father's oldest friend, consigliere, in everything but the name, because Amadeo trusted him past blood. That night, my father learned what was coming, an hour too late to stop it, and he took me, I was 13, and tried to get me out before it began, because he already knew he would not be walking out himself." Her thumb rested on the fallen black king in the box, not lifting it. "He didn't reach the gate. One of the cold country men found us on the servants' stair. He killed my father in front of me. Then he crouched down to where I was, 13. And screaming. and he made certain I would wear that night on my face for the rest of my life. From here, she touched her cheekbone, unhurried, to here, so I would remember. So no one would ever look at me twice again, and he left me there for dead. Because a marked, ugly, dead girl is not a witness. She's only a story people are relieved to stop telling. The room was so quiet, he could hear the snow settling on the sill. Marzio realized his hands had closed into fists on his knees, and that somewhere in the telling, he had risen halfway out of the chair without knowing it. He made himself sit back down. He made himself let her finish, unbroken, because it was the least a man could do to hold still and hear the whole of it, when she had held still and lived the whole of it alone for 11 years. I didn't die. Delphina said an old woman who cooked in this house found me, and hid me, and told no one, and I grew up in other people's back rooms in other towns, learning the only trade that could keep a girl like me alive. A surgeon in the second city offered once to take the scar away. He was kind and skilled, and did not understand why she wept and refused him. She had learned by then what the scar was worth. A beautiful woman gets looked at, a remembered woman gets found. The mark her father's killer had given her, to erase her, had become in the end the finest armor she owned. It was the last gift she would ever have taken from him, and she had spent 11 years turning it into a wall. She looked at him at last. And in all those years of hiding, there was one promise my father couldn't keep that I meant to keep for him. That Amadeo's son would not go into the ground the way Amadeo did. A breath. You were a boy. That winter, my father held this family together. You used to fall asleep at the long table waiting for the men to finish talking, and it was Renzo who carried you up the stairs. He loved you, so I kept you. From a great distance, for years, and then this winter, from very close. Marzio's throat had closed. He forced the words through it. The man with the key, who opened the gate. You already know, she said gently. You've known since the library. You only preferred the other story. So did I once. It's a warmer story than the true one. Say it, your uncle. Her voice did not rise. It never rose. Tancredi opened the gate. Tancredi split your father's harbor with the veins, and then spent 11 years pretending the debt was still owed to strangers. And this winter, he learned that Renzo Marchetti's daughter was still breathing. So he did the tidiest thing a patient man can do. He gave her to you. The ugly bride, no one would believe, close enough to watch. Close enough to be ended quietly, on Ferrante ground, by vain knives, and blamed on a feud that never existed. Something cold and almost proud touched the corner of her mouth. He put the last witness inside the one house he was sure he owned. He thinks he pushed a pawn to the back rank to be rid of it. She reached out, lifted the white queen, and set it down one square nearer the black king. He forgot what a pawn becomes when it reaches the far side of the board. Marzio did not sleep. He sat with the truth the way you sit with a wound you cannot dress, turning it, testing the edges, and every edge cut in the same direction. It fit. That was the unbearable part. Every soft wrongness of the last 11 years, every deal that had died a beat too early, every time the veins had moved, as if they could read the Ferrante mind, all of it fit the shape of one man with a key. And Marzio had spent those years calling that man family, and bending to kiss his dry cheek at the winter table. He tested it, anyway, the way he tested everything. He went down to Sesco before dawn and asked carefully, who exactly had carried the story of the North Wall 11 years ago? Who had first said the word Durso? Who had answered the feud? Who had stood closest to the grave? The answers all came back to one place. They had always come back to one place. He simply had never let himself walk the line to its end, because the end was his uncle's hand on his shoulder, heavy and warm, at the lowest moment of his life, made an orphan by the same hand that made him a king. Raised up so the king would never think to ask what the crown had cost, and in those same sleepless days something else happened, quieter. and far more dangerous to the man Marzio had trained himself to be. He fell in love with his wife. It was not a lightning strike. It was the slow, disarming discovery that the bravest and most dangerous person he had ever met had been standing at his elbow the entire time, dressed as a mouse, taking knives meant for him, and asking for nothing in return. He watched her work the board at night, laying out the real family in wood and felt, and he stopped seeing the scar as the thing the province saw. He saw the map of what she had walked through to be sitting across from him. He saw where the blade had gone in and understood that she had kept his father's line, breathing with the same face they had all laughed at behind the organ. One morning, he brought her coffee. He, who had never carried anything to anyone. She looked at the cup and then at him, and for once the reading stillness failed her. She did not know what to do with a small kindness, and it undid him completely to watch her not know. "You take it, Black," he said roughly to cover it. "You always have. I noticed. You never noticed anything about me," she said. "I'm noticing now." She held the cup in both hands and did not answer, and the orange blossom rose between them in the cold morning, and Marzio understood that he was in very serious trouble. He had spent his whole life keeping warmth out, because warmth was a leak, because warmth was how his father had died. And here it was anyway, poured into a black cup at a cold table, impossible to plug, a woman who wanted nothing from him, which made her the one thing in the world he could not buy, or take, or bury his way out of loving. By the third day, the decision had made itself, clean and total. Tancredi would die. The vain alliance the old man had bled his father for would die with him. There would be no counsel, no forgiveness, and no warm version of the story left standing. But it could not be rushed. Tancredi was patient. Tancredi had been patient for 11 years. A patient man is only beaten by someone willing to be more patient still. So Marzio would do the hardest thing he had ever done. He would keep smiling at the winter table. The test came sooner than he wanted. Nunzio arrived at midday with snow on his shoulders and a message folded behind his careful gray face. Don Tancredi wondered, with a fond old man's concern, whether all was quiet in his nephew's house, whether the new wife was settling, whether anything had disturbed the peace. Marzio thought of the man he had watched Delfina kill on the library floor, the man his uncle had surely expected to hear from by now. "Tell my uncle the house has never been more peaceful," Marzio said, and made his face do the thing it had done at the altar, the thing Tancredi himself had taught him. He looked glad. "Tell him the marriage was the wisest thing he ever forced on me. Tell him I'm grateful." Nunzio's eyes rested on him a moment too long. Then he bowed and went back out into the snow, and the lie sealed shut behind him like ice over a river. And in the sealing of it, Marzio Ferrante stopped being his uncle's creature and became his uncle's executioner. He had married her to obey the man who murdered his father. He would bury that man to keep her. And somewhere in the cold between those two facts, without permission and with no hope of ever taking it back, he had fallen, completely, recklessly, hopelessly, in love with the ugly girl the whole province pitied. He found her at the board that night and sat down across from her. "Teach me," he said, "all of it, every move he has. I don't want to win by an inch. I want him to understand at the very end that he was beaten by the two people he was certain didn't matter." Delfina looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since the cathedral, she smiled at him with her whole face. "Then stop playing not to lose," she said, and turned the board so the white pieces faced him, and start playing to end it. They played every night after that, and the game on the board was never only the game on the board. He was a fast study, which did not surprise her, and a reckless one, which did. He wanted to sweep pieces. He wanted the throat. She kept her hand flat on the board and made him wait, made him learn that the fastest way to lose to a patient man is to show him you are in a hurry to win. You move like a man who has always had more men and more guns. she told him. That is a habit that gets you killed the one time you don't. He did not like hearing it. He heard it anyway. It was becoming, he realized, the thing he trusted most in the world, that she would tell him the true thing in that flat, quiet voice, whether or not he wanted it told. She taught him the real family the way she saw it, not as an org chart of loyalty and fear, but as a board where every piece had a weight and a line and a thing it wanted. Tancredi was the Black King, slow, protected, deadly, only through others, and fatally certain the board belonged to him. The Vanes were the far rank, patient and cold, waiting to promote a pawn of their own into the harbor the moment the king said the word. And scattered between them were the pieces still in play, the captains, the fences, the bot police, the families who would swing whichever way the wind of a dawn-killing blew. "You've been building this for years," Marzio said one night, watching her hand hover over the pieces. "Not the marriage, the whole board. You didn't fall into my house, you walked into it." "I let a patient man think he was moving me," Delphina said. "It's the only way to beat a patient man. You have to be willing to look, for a very long time, exactly like his idea of a victory." He reached across the board and stilled her hand under his. She let him. It was becoming a thing between them. This letting, she who had let no one near her in 11 years, allowing his hand, his coffee, his eyes. "And when it's done," he said, "when the board is clear, what did you walk in for, Delphina? What do you want at the end of it?" She was quiet a long moment. The lamp caught the silver of the scar. "I stopped letting myself want things at 13, she said. "Wanting is how they find you." Then, lower, "Ask me again when your uncle is in the ground. I might have an answer by then." He kissed her that night. He had not planned it. Marzio Ferrante planned everything. And he did not plan the way he rose and came around the small table and took her ruined, extraordinary face in both hands, or the startled one, before her hands came up and fisted in his shirt as though she had been holding her breath since the servant's stare and had only now remembered she was allowed to let it go. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his sternum, over the heart, and he felt her shaking. And he understood that of all the dangerous things this woman had done, letting herself be held was the one that frightened her most. "This complicates the board," she murmured into his shirt. "No," he said. "It clarifies it." They did not become soft, there was no time for it, and neither of them had ever been built for softness, but the temperature of the house changed. She stopped keeping to the east wing. He stopped pretending the marriage was his uncle's arrangement and not the truest thing in his life. Some nights they only sat over the board and did not play, her feet drawn up under her, his hand loose in her hair. The two of them saying nothing while the snow came down. Two people who had each spent a lifetime alone, learning slowly and late that the other one was safe to lean on. Marzio had never once had that. He understood now, with something close to terror, exactly how much he had to lose. But the board was moving whether they willed it or not, and it was moving toward them. The proof was the first thing she gave him fully. In the lining of an old coat she kept in the plainest corner of the plainest wardrobe, sewn flat, where no thief would waste a second glance, was a single folded paper, gone soft as cloth with age. Renzo Marchetti's own hand, written the last night of his life, sealed with the consigliere's ring that half the old families would still recognize on sight. It named the gate, the key, the buyer, and the price. A dead man's sworn account, in a hand the province had trusted for 30 years. On its own it would start a war. Set beside the body of a vain knife man, with a gate on his wrist, and beside the living daughter who had watched it all, it would end one. She had carried it for 11 years, sewn into coat after coat as the coats wore out, moved from city to city, slept on, nearly burned 100 times when the hiding got too heavy to hold. It was the only thing she owned. It was her father's voice, still speaking, folded soft as cloth against the cold. She handed it to Marzio the way you hand someone your own beating heart, and watched his face while he read the dead man's hand and did not breathe again until he looked up. "This is a checkmate," Marzio said, holding the fragile paper as if it might take flight. "It's a threat of checkmate," Delphina corrected. "There's a difference, and men die in it. He has to believe he's winning, right up until the second he isn't. The moment Tancredi knows this paper exists, he burns the board, kills us both, kills anyone who could have seen it, and mourns beautifully at the funeral." Patience, Marzio. Patience became harder 3 days later, when Cesco came to him in the cold gray of the yard, with a face like a closed fist. "Someone's talking to the north," Cesco said. "Small things where you'll be when the harbor guard thins. I fed 2 different routes to 2 different men last week. Quiet, just to see." He paused, and Marzio watched loyalty and grief war in the big man's jaw. "The one I gave to Bardo came back to me out of a vain mouth this morning. Boss, it's Bardo." Bardo, who had carried a 19-year-old Marcio out of a burning warehouse on his back, who had stood at his shoulder at his father's grave, who called him nephew when the wine was good. For a moment Marzio said nothing. He thought of the smell of his own scorched coat and a big man's shoulder under him in the smoke. He thought of Bardo's laugh, and Bardo's ugly, happy children he had bounced on his knee, and how Bardo had wept, actually wept at Amadeo's grave. Everything he had believed was solid ground kept turning out to be ice, something moving under it. "Does he know that you know?" Marzio said at last. Cesco shook his head. "Then he stays useful," Marzio said, and was quietly amazed at how much like his wife he had begun to sound. "A traitor who thinks he's safe will hand you everything if you only let him keep thinking it." And before Marzio could close his hand around that, before the cold could even finish moving through him, Nunzio's car was turning up the drive again, and the old man's message this time was not a question. Don Tancredi requested the honor of his nephew and his nephew's wife at the old house 3 nights hence, a family council, to settle the northern question once and for all. Delphina, when Marzio told her, only looked out at the snow for a long time. "He's calling us home to die," she said softly. "In the same house where he killed my father." Then she turned, and there was something in her face he had never seen there. Not fear, and not the cold, something almost like hunger. "Good. Tell me how you know it's the killing floor," Marzio said. "Not a council, a trap. Tell me how you're sure." "Because he invited the wife." Delphina laid it out on the board with the pieces, the way she laid out everything, so he could see it and not just hear it. "Tancredi has never in his life wanted a woman in a business room. He wants me there for one reason. The same reason he married me to you. To end the witness and the heir in one night on ground he controls with vain hands, and mourn us both as victims of the feud that never was. 2 problems, 1 grave. He is nothing if not tidy. Then we don't go. Then he comes here, or he takes you on a road, or he poisons a glass, and we never get the room again." She shook her head. "No, we go, but we go having already moved first." They had 3 nights, and they did not waste an hour of them. The first thing was Bardo. Marzio did not confront him. A cornered traitor is only useful as a mirror, and Delphina wanted him held up to the light. So they fed him a lie shaped exactly like the truth Tancredi wanted, that Marzio suspected nothing, that the wife was a docile disappointment, that he would come to the council grateful and unarmed and glad, the way he had told Nunzio he was. Bardo carried it north like a good dog, and in carrying it, he told them everything. How many men the Vanes were sending, which road they'd take, that the killing was set for after the meal, when the wine had done its work and the heir's guard had been sent to wait with the cars. Every piece of it, Marzio checked against the sealed testament and against the shape of the man he had known his uncle to be, and every piece of it held. Tancredi would not dirty his own hands. Tancredi would sit at the head of the table, looking grieved before the fact, and let northern men do the thing, and let the families believe a feud had reached into his own house and stolen his beloved nephew and the poor scarred wife along with him. He had done it once already, exactly this way, 11 years ago. And it had worked so beautifully that he had never once imagined needing a second plan. "He's saved us the trouble of guessing," Delphina said, almost fond. "A traitor is the most honest man in any room, if you know how to ask." The second thing nearly cost Marzio everything, and it was the night he understood, past all doubt, what she was. Bardo was not content to wait for the old house. A dead air before the council would let Tancredi keep even his fond old hands clean. An accident, a rival, a tragedy. The council would then convene to avenge. On the second night, a man came over the harbor wall while Marzio worked late in the study, and he was good, and he was quiet, and Marzio never heard him at all. What he heard was the small, flat cough of Delphina's pistol from the dark behind him, and the heavy sound of a big man folding onto the study floor, with a wire still uncoiling from his hands. Marzio spun with his own gun already up, and found the thing over before it had begun for him. The Garrotta man down, Delphina stepping out of the black of the gallery stair, lowering the pistol, her face doing nothing at all. 2 feet of piano wire lay across his desk blotter, exactly where his throat had been meant to go. He had not heard the man breathe. He had not heard the door. He would have died over his own papers, and Bardo would have called it a vain hit, and Tancredi would have wept prettily at the graveside 3 days later. She had been watching the study from the gallery above. She had been watching every night. She had never once told him. He crossed to her, shaking, not for himself, but at the arithmetic of it, at how many nights she had stood guard in the dark over a man who used to be ashamed of her. He took her face in his hands. "You have to sleep sometime," he said, and heard how his voice broke on it. "I'll sleep," she said, "when your uncle can't reach you in it." And she let him hold her, and she did not let go of the gun. By the third night the board was set, and it was hers. She had turned Tancredi's own trap inside out with a patience that frightened him. The vain men would come the road Bardo had named, and 30 of Shesco's best guns would already be waiting along it, in the dark, in the snow. Bardo would be allowed to keep believing he was the cleverest man alive until the exact moment he wasn't. And Renzo Marchetti's sealed testament would ride into the old house, folded against Delphina's heart, because the killing floor Tancredi had chosen would also, if she played it right, be full of the other families, men who feared the Vanes but would never ever kneel to a Don who had murdered his own brother's son and lied to their faces for 11 years. Show them that, and the room would turn. A Don killer keeps power only as long as no one can prove it. Proof was the one thing Delphina had spent her whole ruined life keeping alive. "It has to be public," she said. "That is the whole game. He built a private killing, and I am going to turn it into a public trial. In front of the Aldani, the Sabatini, every old name that fears the Vanes but fears a Don killer more. He wants witnesses to our funeral. I am going to hand him witnesses to his own." She set a black bishop down among the far pieces. "The moment they believe the paper, the room stops being his. And a man who has spent 11 years buying loyalty finds out all at once exactly how little of it he actually owns." "And if the room doesn't turn?" Marzio asked. "If they're too frightened of the North to move? Then we will have started the killing before they finish deciding," Delphina said. "And frightened men always side with whoever is already winning. We give them a reason to have been on our side all along. Old men love nothing in this world better than a story in which they were brave. There's one more piece," she said, the last night quietly, and for the first time her hand was not quite steady on the board. "The Vanes are sending their own blood to make sure it's done. Corvin Vane," she said the name the way you say a thing you have practiced saying, so it can't cut you, and failed. "He's the one who came up the servants' stair 11 years ago. He killed my father. He gave me this." Her fingers rose to the scar, and stopped. "He'll be in that house. In my father's house. And I have waited 11 years to be in a room with him again. Marzio took her unsteady hand and held it until it stilled. Then we'll be in it together, he said. Every move, to the end of the board. She turned her hand in his until their fingers laced, and for a while neither of them spoke. If it goes wrong tomorrow, she said at last. If he is cleverer than I have allowed for. He isn't. If he is, she pressed, you don't stay for me. You put the paper where the families will find it, and you walk out of that house alive, and you finish it from the outside. Promise me that. No, Marzio said. She almost smiled. You're a terrible student. I had a demanding teacher. He lifted her scarred hand and pressed his mouth to the knuckles. I am not walking out of any room you're still standing in. Not anymore. That part of my life is finished. Outside, the snow began again, soft and total, burying the road to the old house. In 3 hours they would drive it. And somewhere at the far end of it, an old man was laying 2 plates close together at the head of a very long table, certain, as he had been certain for 11 years, that he was the only one in the province still playing the game. The old house sat waiting in the falling snow, every window gold, like something warm. Marzio knew better now. He had learned, at last, to read the difference between warmth and the imitation of it. They came up the road slow. Haws! Behind them, unseen, Sesko's men were already melting into the pines along the last mile, where the Vane road met the Ferrante one. The killing Tancredi had planned for the end of the meal was going to arrive a great deal earlier than he intended, and from a direction he did not expect. In the car, Delfina sat very still, Renzo's testament folded against her heart, and Marzio did not tell her it would be all right, because she would have known it for the lie it was. He only took her hand across the seat and held it, and felt her hold back. He had walked into rooms meant to kill him before. He had never walked into one holding the hand of the person he was most afraid to lose, which he understood dimly was the true reason men, like his uncle, preferred to love no one at all. Love hands your enemy, the one hostage you cannot bear to have taken. He set the thought down where he set everything down now, into the cold quiet Delfina had taught him to keep. He had a part to play tonight, and he had learned it from the finest liar he had ever known, and he intended to use every hour of that education to bury the man who had taught it to him. Tancredi received them in the long dining room at the head of the table where Amadeo had once sat, and the sight of the old man in his father's chair struck Marzio the way it always had, except that now he knew precisely what it meant, and the knowing burned the last warmth out of him and left something clean and cold and ready. The room was full. That was the thing Tancredi had gotten wrong in his tidiness. He had wanted witnesses to the grief, and so he had called the families. The Aldani patriarch, the old Sabatini widow who held the fish market, Ostri, sweating, Bardo, at Tancredi's right hand, wearing the small, proud smile of a man who believes he is about to be paid. And along the cold wall, apart, 3 men from the north country in good coats, and at their center, gray-eyed and easy, a tall man with a hunter's stillness, whom Delfina did not look at, because if she looked at him too soon, she would not be able to stop. Corvin Vane, nephew, Tancredi said, rising, arms wide, the warmth pouring off him like heat off a stove with nothing in it. And the wife, sit, both of you. Eat, we have so much to settle, and business sours the stomach. Marzio did not sit. He walked the length of his father's table, unhurried, and the room quieted to watch him do it. And he stopped at the far end, where he could see every face at once. I want to tell a story first, Marzio said. About a winter, 11 years ago, about a wall no one climbed, and a gate that was opened from the inside. Tancredi's face did not change, but his hand, resting on the white cloth, went still, the exact stillness Marzio had watched Delfina teach him to read, the stillness of a king who has seen a line open on the board that he did not know was there. Marzio, the old man said, warmly, warningly. Grief is an old wound. Don't pick it in front of guests. I'm not grieving. Marzio said, I'm collecting. And he began to tell it. The key, the buyer, the price. The harbor split with the cold country over his father's body. He told it plainly, without heat, and he watched the family's faces move from discomfort to something sharper. Because every old man in that room had wondered, once in a locked-back part of himself, why the D'Urso feud had ended so neatly and profited Tancredi so well. The Aldani patriarch, who was 80 and forgot nothing, set down his glass. The Sabatini widow's black eyes moved from Tancredi to Marzio, and back, with the slow arithmetic of a woman who had buried 3 husbands and outlived every man who ever underestimated her. Austria had gone the color of tallow. The room was tilting, and every soul in it could feel the tilt. And Tancredi, who had ruled that room for 11 years on the strength of a single story, felt it first, and felt it worst. Lies, Tancredi said, and the warmth was gone now. The river-stone eyes flat and quick, moving to Bardo, to Corvin, giving the order without a word. A jealous nephew, poisoned, by the witness, Delfina said. She had not raised her voice, she never raised it. But it cut the old man's sentence clean in half, and she stepped out from behind Marzio into the light of the long table. And for the first time she turned her face fully to the room, the scar, and all of it, and let them see her. My name is Delfina Marchetti, she said. Renzo Marchetti was my father. I was 13 years old on the servant's stair of this house. The night your gate opened, Don Tancredi, I watched your guests kill my father. I watched one of them mark my face so that I would never be believed. Her eyes went at last to the cold wall, to the tall gray-eyed man, and they did not waver. Hello, Corvin. You should have made sure. 4, 1, heartbeat. The long room hung in perfect silence, snow ticking at the black windows. Then, Tancredi reached for the bell to bring his men, and Corvin Vane's hand slid inside his good coat, and Bardo rose, smiling with a pistol already half drawn. And every patient thing Delfina had built for 11 years came down on the room at once. The doors at both ends came open. Sesko was through the near one before Bardo cleared leather, and his single shot cracked across the room like a door slammed in a stone hall. Bardo's proud smile was still forming as he went back over his chair, his own pistol never fired. Beyond the walls, out along the snow road, a ragged storm of gunfire rolled up out of the dark as 30 Ferrante guns fell on the Vane convoy that had come exactly as Bardo had promised, to finish a job that was already finished. The northern men along the wall reached for iron and found Ferrante muzzles already at their throats. The families did not move. The families, being old and wise, put their hands flat on the white cloth and became very interested in staying alive. It was over in the time it takes to overturn a table. But the seconds inside it stretched long and strange, the way they always did for Marzio when the guns came out. The crack and reek of it, the Sabatini widow calmly tipping her own chair back out of the line of fire, the Aldani men raising empty hands to show they wanted no part of the North's quarrel, Austri scrambling under the table and staying there. Sesko moved through the room with the flat economy of a man who had done this in the dark 100 times, and the northern men who had come to watch a murder discovered they had walked instead into an execution that was not the one they had been promised. Corvin Vane was faster than all of it. He had the gun out and rising toward Marzio when Delfina crossed the space between them. She did not go for a weapon. She went for him, low and certain, the way 11 years teaches a body to move, and the shot he got off punched into the ceiling as she took his gun arm past her and drove him back into the cold plaster wall. Marzio started forward, and she said one word, mine, without turning, and he stopped, because some debts cannot be paid by anyone but the one who is owed. What happened at the wall was quick and quiet, and 11 years in the making. When it was done, Corvin Vane sat slack against the plaster, the hunter's stillness gone out of his gray eyes forever, And Delphina stood over him with her father's blood answered at last, breathing hard, alive. She had not wept for fear, and she did not weep now. She reached up and touched the scar once, deliberately, the way you close a book you have finally finished reading. Then she turned her face down toward the floor, toward the sealed dark of the servant's stair, one story below, where a 13-year-old had once screamed into her father's coat. "It's done," she said quietly, to a man who could no longer hear her. "Papa, it's done," which left the old man. Tancredi had not run. There was nowhere in that house to run, to that Amadio's ghost did not already own. He stood at the head of the table with his back very straight, and he looked at Marcio, and he found, at the end, the only card a patient man keeps for the end, the truth, offered as if it were a gift. "I made you," Tancredi said. "Everything you are, I built. Your father was soft, he would have lost it all inside a year. The harbor, the family, you. I did what he was too weak to do. I have loved you like a son." It was almost gentle. "You won't kill me. You don't have it in you. It was never in you. That's the one thing I could never beat into your blood." Marzio looked at the man who had held his shoulder at the grave, who had made him a king, who had taught him, with a hand on his cheek, exactly how to look glad while you lied. "You taught me everything you know," Marzio said. "That was your mistake." He raised the gun. "You never learned anything from her." For half a heartbeat something moved behind the riverstone eyes, not fear. The old man had no fear left in him, but the particular astonishment of a lifelong player who looks down at the board and finds the game ended 3 moves ago, and no one thought to tell him. He opened his mouth. Whatever last patient thing he meant to say, he did not get to say it. Marzio had finally learned the one lesson his uncle could never teach, and his wife had never needed to be taught. That there is a mercy sometimes in refusing to let a liar keep the final word. He fired once. Tancredi Ferrante sat down slowly in his brother's chair, at the head of his brother's table, and did not get up again, and the 11-year winter was finally wholly over. Marzio lowered the gun into the ringing quiet. Across the room Delphina was watching him. Not the board, not the doors, not the dead, him. And on her ruined, extraordinary face was an expression he had waited his whole cold life to have aimed at him, and had never once, until this snow-buried moment, believed he might deserve. The families were reasonable? Afterward. Old men who hold fish markets and back rooms have a fine instinct for the direction of the wind. And the wind in that house had changed for good. They had watched a dawn killer, exposed by a dead consigliere's own hand and a living daughter's scarred face, and they had watched the nephew everyone thought soft put a bullet through the lie that had ruled the province for 11 years. No one wanted the harbor now. No one wanted anything but to be remembered, later, as having sat very still with their hands on the cloth. By morning, the story was already moving through the province the way fire moves through dry grass, and it moved in exactly the shape Delphina had built for it, not the tale of a nephew's coup, but of a hero's daughter, come back from the dead to lay a murdered Don to rest. It was a better story than the one Tancredi had told. It had the advantage of being true, and Delphina had learned long ago that the truth, handled patiently, cuts deeper than any lie a frightened man can invent. The families sent no armies. They sent condolences and quiet gifts and careful sons to take the temperature of the new house, and found it colder and surer than the old man's had ever been. The North wanted less than that. Marzio let 3 days pass before he called Aldous Vane, because he wanted the old patriarch to spend 3 days learning how many of his men had gone into the snow on the Ferrante road and not come home, and how his own blood, Corvin, had died against a wall in a house full of witnesses. When the call connected, there was no warmth in it, and no threat, only the flat arithmetic of a man who held every card. He had rehearsed none of it. He did not need to. Delphina sat in the chair across the desk with her feet drawn up, watching him the way she watched a board, and every card in his hand She had dealt him across 11 patient years. All he had to do was play them slowly. "You bought a Ferrante Don once," Marzio said. "You paid for him with knives, and for 11 years you thought you'd made a clever purchase. I'm calling to tell you, the account is closed. The man you bought is dead. The man who opened your gate is dead, your nephew is dead. And I have, in a safe, you will never find a paper in Renzo Marchetti's hand that ties your family to the murder of a Don. The one crime no family in this country forgives, because if it's allowed once, none of you are safe in your own chairs ever again." He let that settle the way Delfina had taught him to let things settle. "Stay north of the border, Aldous. Move one crate of anything through my water. Send one more man down my road and I won't answer it with guns. I'll answer it with the paper. I'll make sure every family from here to the cold country knows exactly what the Vanes do to the Dons who trust them. You'll be finished by spring, and it won't be me who finishes you. It'll be your own friends." There was a long silence on the line. Then quietly, the sound of a powerful old man discovering the precise shape of the wall he'd walked into. "What do you want?" Aldous Vane said. "Nothing," Marzio said. "That's the beauty of it. I want to never hear your name again." And he hung up, and the north stayed north, and it stayed north for good. He did not go home that night. He went, instead, back to the old house, his father's house. And he brought Delfina. And he brought 2 men with picks and lamps, because there was one more thing that had waited 11 years, and would wait no longer. They found the old servant's stair behind a plastered wall Tancredi had sealed the same winter he'd taken the house. Marzio took a lamp down it himself. The stone still held the narrow dark, where a 13-year-old girl had watched her father die. He stood in it a long time. Then he went back up, and he took Delfina's hand, and he told her a thing he had decided somewhere between the killing and the dawn. "The story of the bad winter gets told now," he said. "All of it. Renzo Marchetti kept this family alive, and my uncle spent 20 years forbidding his name to be spoken because a hero makes a murder harder to hide. That ends. Every family in the province is going to know what your father was. There's going to be his name over the harbor gate in stone, where mine is. He held it. He gets to keep it." Delfina, who had not cried on the servant's stair, or over Corvin Vane, or through 11 years of hiding, put her hand over her mouth and wept then, silently, the way she did everything, her shoulders shaking under his arm while the snow came down over the harbor her father had saved. He held her while she wept, and he did not tell her it was all right, because some things are not all right, and never will be, and she would have known the lie the instant he told it. He only stood in the cold with her, in the house where it had happened, and let her set down at last a grief she had carried so long and so silently that she had begun to mistake it for the shape of herself. When it was spent, she wiped her face with the back of her scarred hand and looked at him, half embarrassed and wholly changed, and he understood that he had just been handed the one thing she had never shown a living soul. The province had a long memory for faces, and it spent that first thawing month learning a new thing to feel when it looked at the scar. Where there had always been the quick, comfortable glance away, now there was something the old families had nearly forgotten how to offer a woman: deference. At the first sit-down Marzio held as the undisputed head of the harbor, he did not seat Delfina at the far end of the table. He seated her at his right hand, where the consigliere sits, where the most trusted blood in a family sits, and when the Aldani patriarch came to pay his respects, he bowed to her first, and to Marzio second, and every man in the room understood the order of it. The ugly one, the charity bride, she let them look now. She had earned the looking, and somewhere on a snow road that winter, she had stopped at long last, being afraid of being found. The house on the harbor changed after that, slowly, the way a hard winter gives way. Not all at once, but you look up one day, and the light is simply different. The staff stopped flinching in the halls for good. Sesko, who had lost a friend in Bardo, and found something steadier in the trade of it, took to calling her Signora in a voice with nothing of pity in it, and everything of respect. And Marzio Ferrante, who had built an empire on keeping warmth out because warmth was a leak, learned to leave the door of himself open to exactly one person, and discovered that the leak he had feared his whole life was the only thing that had ever truly kept him alive. The first night of that new quiet, he woke at some black hour out of old habit and found her asleep beside him. Actually asleep, deep and slack and undefended, one scarred hand lying open on the pillow, where for 11 years it had held a gun. He lay still and watched her breathe. He thought of all the nights she had not slept, standing guard in his gallery, over a man who had been ashamed of her, and he made himself a promise, as cold and total as any he had ever made across a table with a gun on it, that she would never again close her eyes in a house she was not safe in. He would be the wall now. He had spent his whole life building walls to keep the world out. He had finally found one worth building. Later, much later, when the house was quiet and the fire was high, they sat over the board one more time. She had set it up out of habit or ceremony. Neither of them moved a piece. "You asked me once what I walked in for," Delphina said, "what I'd want when the board was clear." She turned the white queen slowly in her fingers, watching the firelight run along it. "I didn't have an answer. I'd trained myself so long not to want anything that I'd forgotten how wanting is how they find you." She set the queen down in the center of the board, alone, unthreatened, sovereign. "And then a cold, arrogant man started noticing how I take my coffee, and carried it to me himself, and got himself hopelessly, stupidly in the way of everything I'd planned." Her eyes came up to his, dark and steady and, for once, entirely unguarded. "I walked in to keep Amadeo's son alive. I'm staying because somewhere in it I stopped protecting you and started loving you, and I don't know how to make myself sorry." Marzio reached across the board and traced, with one careful thumb, the silver line of the scar the whole province had pitied, from the cheekbone to the jaw, unhurried, the way a man reads something he intends to know by heart. "They called you the ugly one," he said, "the mouse, the charity bride." He shook his head slowly. "I married the most dangerous, most beautiful, most patient person I have ever known, and I was the last man in the province to see it." "You were never a pawn on his board, Delphina. You were never on his board at all." He closed his hand gently around hers, around the white queen inside it. "You were playing a different game the whole time. And you're the only reason I'm alive to lose to you every night for the rest of my life." For a moment, Delphina did not move. She looked at the white queen, alone in the center of the board, and then at the man across from her, who had once seated her at the far end of every table, and something in her face came all the way open. The last locked door, the one on the servant's stair, the one she had guarded since she was 13 years old. "You asked me what I'd want when the board was clear," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "This, only this. A warm room, a fire, a game with nothing at stake, and you across it, losing badly." She reached out, and for the first time in 11 years, turned a piece over, in her fingers, not to win with it, but only to feel its weight. "I spent my whole life being no one, so that no one could ever take anything from me again. You made it worth the risk of being someone. Do you understand what that costs a person? Like me? Do you understand what you are worth to me now?" "Teach me the cost," he said, "every night, for the rest of my life." "I had a demanding teacher." She leaned across the pieces and kissed him, and the last of the practiced stillness went out of her for good. And what was left underneath? The thing she had guarded since she was 13 on a dark stair, she finally, at long last, let him hold. Outside, over the harbor and the sleeping city, and the gate where a hero's name would soon be cut in stone, the snow stopped falling. For the first time in 11 years, The morning that came up over the Ferrante water was clean and cold and entirely without shadow. Marzio Ferrante had married the girl no one would look at twice, to obey the man who murdered his father and had burned that man and his whole old life to the ground the moment he understood that the quiet one at the edge of the room had been holding his entire world together with her scarred and steady hands. He had been ashamed of her for 21 days. He would spend the rest of his life making sure the world learned her name. And that is what the powerful never understand about the quiet ones. While you're busy not looking at her, calling her plain, calling her nothing, seating her at the far end of the table, she is 3 moves from the end of the board, and she has been the whole time. Marzio didn't just marry the girl no one wanted. He buried the man who made him a king the moment he understood she was the only one who had ever truly protected him. If a love this fierce and hard won is the kind of story you're here for, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this one. And tell me in the comments, what was the exact moment you knew Marzio was hers? I'll see you in the next one.